You weren't supposed to hear that, she said. And then she just went back to sipping her drink. That's what stuck with me more than the sentence itself. The way she didn't even flinch. The way she said it like I was the one who'd crossed a line. Like my ears had been somewhere they didn't belong. She was sitting across from me, next to her coworker, the one with the perfect posture and the stupid linen shirt. It was one of those semi-fancy rooftop bars, where everything smells like citrus and ambition. She wore red. She never wore red with me. We were there to celebrate a promotion. Not mine. Hers. Obviously. She said I should come. Said I'd finally get to meet the team. Turns out, I didn't need to meet them. I needed to hear her. I didn't mean to overhear it. Not really. I was just coming back from the bathroom. I paused behind the tall wooden divider, trying to spot a waiter for another drink. That's when she leaned in close to him. Too close. And said, honestly, if I didn't feel so guilty afterward, I'd have done it again that same night. That sentence didn't hit all at once. It landed in pieces. Honestly, like this was a confession wrapped in a joke. If I didn't feel so guilty. Oh, so there was guilt, just not enough to stop it. I'd have done it again, past tense, but hungry. That same night. Meaning, yes, this happened while I was alive in her life. While we still shared a bed. While I was worrying about whether she liked the birthday gift I got her. She said it with a smile. A slow, relaxed, truthful smile. And he laughed. Not awkwardly. Not nervously. Not with that, we're being bad, kind of smirk. He laughed like it was their inside joke. Like he knew exactly what she was talking about. I stood there behind that divider for maybe 3 seconds. Long enough to die 3 different ways in my own head. Then I walked around, back to the table. She saw me. She didn't blink. I sat down. She didn't speak. Neither did I. Until, eventually, she looked up and said, like she was commenting on the weather. You weren't supposed to hear that. That was all. I stood up. My chair made a sound. I didn't care. I walked away without my jacket. Without paying for the drinks. Without turning around. I think I heard someone say my name. Could have been her. Could have been him. Could have been the wind. I walked down 17 blocks in dress shoes that don't fit anymore, because I bought them before my ankles decided to swell when I get stressed. I went home. Sat in the dark. Took off my shoes, but not my socks. Tried to breathe through it. I still don't know who she cheated with. But I'm starting to think it doesn't matter. Because the way she said it. Not what she said, but how. That's what told me everything. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the couch with the TV on mute, watching some late-night documentary about a forgotten city buried under the sea. I couldn't follow it. My eyes were open, but my mind kept rewinding to that bar, to her voice, to the way she didn't stutter or hesitate. That wasn't someone caught in a moment. That was someone who had already moved on emotionally and forgot to send me the memo. Around 3:40 a.m., I noticed I still had her location shared on my phone. She'd forgotten, I guess. It showed she was still at the bar. I watched the little dot pulse for another 30 minutes. Then it disappeared. By the time the sun came up, I was still fully dressed. I hadn't moved. There was an imprint of my elbow in the armrest. It looked like a bruise. I finally stood up, stretched, and went to the bathroom just to splash water on my face. I looked in the mirror and hated what I saw. Puffy eyes. Red around the nostrils. Jaw tight like I'd been clenching it in my sleep. Except I hadn't slept. She came back around 9 a.m. I heard the keys in the lock, soft footsteps, then the fridge opening. She didn't say anything. She didn't call out to check if I was home. She just opened a bottle of water and started scrolling on her phone like it was any other Saturday morning. I stayed in the hallway, just out of her line of sight, watching. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyingly peaceful. Eventually, I walked into the kitchen. She glanced up, surprised but not startled. I waited for her to speak first, but she just blinked and took another sip of water. Finally, I asked, "Where did you go after the bar?" She didn't answer right away. She didn't even change her expression. Then, without missing a beat, she said, "Tanner's place. We were drinking. It wasn't safe to drive." That was it. No apology. No pause. Just a cold fact, presented like I should be thanking her for being responsible. I asked, "Did you sleep with him?" She laughed. Laughed. Then she said, "You're really going to ask me that? After everything?" Everything. What everything? What did she mean? I didn't answer. I walked back into the living room, sat down, and stared at the wall. I could hear her moving behind me, opening the cupboard, pouring cereal, crunching like she wasn't chewing on the edges of our marriage. And then, she said something I still can't get out of my head. I didn't mean for you to hear it like that, she said. But maybe it's better this way. At least now, we can stop pretending. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some accident. This wasn't an emotional slip. This was a soft launch of her escape plan. She wanted me to hear it. She wanted me to walk away so she wouldn't have to be the one who ended things. It was calculated, neat, clean, bloodless, for her. That sentence. Now we can stop pretending. It made my skin go cold, because I realized I had been pretending for a long time. Pretending we were okay. Pretending her late nights and client emergencies were real. Pretending that emotional distance was just exhaustion, not disinterest. I'd been pretending. She hadn't. She'd moved on months ago. I was just the last one to notice. I didn't leave the apartment. I didn't yell or demand anything. I just sat there and started thinking, really thinking, about everything she'd said and done over the past 6 months. The missed anniversaries. The way she suddenly became protective of her phone. The work trips that always seemed to involve Tanner. I had dismissed all of it because that's what you do when you trust someone. Now I wasn't sure if trust was ever part of it, or if I had confused silence with stability. She left again that afternoon. Said she needed space. Said we should pause before things get more toxic. I didn't argue. I just nodded. But when she left, I opened her laptop. I knew her password. Of course I did. What I found next is something I'm still trying to make sense of. And no, it wasn't messages. It wasn't emails. It was a folder, hidden in plain sight, labeled Phase 2. At first, I thought it was just work stuff. Maybe some branding pitch or campaign material. Mary Bell had always kept her creative files meticulously organized, and Phase 2 sounded like something that belonged in a strategy meeting, not a betrayal. But when I opened the folder, the first thing I saw was a document titled Emotional Drift Timeline. It wasn't a clever name. It was literal. I clicked it open, expecting a list of project milestones or whatever marketing people use to feel important. Instead, I found dates, going back nearly a year, with little bullet point entries beneath each one. Short, surgical phrases. Things like, pulled back physically, no comment from him. Tested delayed responses, no conflict, internal note. He assumes best intentions. Mentioned Tanner 3 times this week, observed mild irritation, but no follow-up questions. Canceled anniversary plans. Response, disappointment, not anger. He is conflict avoidant. I scrolled through the entries in silence, my eyes starting to blur. There were dozens of them. This wasn't a diary. This was a dissection. She had been studying me like I was a case file. Not a husband. Not a person. A subject in an experiment she was documenting. Then I found another file called Convo Framework, Justification Language. I opened it. Inside were entire paragraphs, rehearsed sentences, explanations she had written and likely memorized in case she ever got caught. Phrases like, we haven't been connected in years, and I tried so hard, but I felt more and more invisible. It was never just about sex, it was about being seen again. You're a good man, but that doesn't mean we were good together. Each phrase was followed by a note. Use only if he gets emotional. Don't blame directly. Maintain calm tone to preserve moral ground. She had rehearsed my pain. I don't know how long I sat there, just staring at the screen. At some point, my leg went numb. The apartment was dead silent, but I swear I could still hear the sound of her voice in my head, saying those lines with that calm, manufactured sympathy she uses when she wants to feel like the adult in the room. There were pictures, too. Not explicit. Worse than that, intimate. A photo of her and Tanner at some winery I didn't know she ever visited. Another one of her in his oversized hoodie, curled up on a leather couch that clearly wasn't ours. And then one of the two of them with her head on his shoulder, both asleep, like they'd been doing it forever. None of them had dates in the file names, but they didn't need timestamps. I could tell from her haircut alone when they were taken. They stretched back further than I wanted to admit. There was one more file, way at the bottom of the folder. It was a short video clip. No label, no context, just 23 seconds long. Against my better judgment, I clicked. It started with the camera pointed at her legs, crossed, elegant, familiar. Then the angle tilted, like someone sitting across from her at a cafe. She was smiling. Not like she smiled with me. This one had teeth, depth, real affection. Then she said something I'll never forget, even if I live another 100 years. I know exactly how he'll react. He'll crumble, but he won't scream. He'll think that makes him stronger. And then the clip ended. That was it. 23 seconds that ripped out every stitch I'd used to hold myself together for the last decade. I closed the laptop. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even break anything. I just sat there, in the too quiet apartment, realizing I wasn't living in the aftermath of a betrayal. I was still inside it. Every day, every conversation for the past year had been part of the architecture of a quiet, elegant exit plan. She had designed her way out of me, and I had made it easy. I had been the perfect man to cheat on. Passive, predictable, forgiving. I hadn't made her feel seen, but worse than that, I had let her disappear without noticing. The worst part? She was right. I was crumbling. Quietly. The way she expected. But not for long. Because phase 2 wasn't just about how she'd end things. It was also about how she planned to reinvent herself. And what I found next in that folder made me realize she hadn't just moved on from me. She was planning to erase me. I should have closed the laptop and walked away. That would have been the smart thing. The sane thing. But by then, I wasn't thinking like someone who still had his life intact. I was thinking like a man who'd found the first crack in the wall and couldn't stop picking at it, even as it spread into something gaping and permanent. The deeper I went into her folder, the less familiar everything felt. This wasn't just evidence of an affair, it was a blueprint of my replacement. There was a subfolder I hadn't noticed before. It was tucked inside another one called Backlog Legacy. The title struck me as odd, like it was archival, or historic, or something you'd name a podcast. Inside, I found dozens of files. Names I didn't recognize. Dates going back years before we even met. Some of them were labeled cryptically. M. R. Incomplete. Seattle exit. Ben. Final edit. I opened one at random. It was another timeline. Just like the one she made for me. Except this one ended with a police report. My stomach twisted. I searched the name at the top. Benjamin L. Adair. Within minutes, I found an obituary. Died in 2012. Suicide. Except in her notes, under the final bullet point, she'd written, disassociation successful. No contact initiated. Psychological resolution unclear, but manageable. Manageable? There were no signs she had any formal training in psychology. Not in a licensed way, at least. But the language, the structure, it was clinical. Cold. Like she wasn't just analyzing people, she was running psychological simulations. I clicked open another document. Then another. The patterns started forming. There were always 3 stages. Bonding. Undermining. Recasting. Every man had been a project. Every relationship, strategic. Each one shaped her into something slightly different. She changed her speech patterns, her politics, even her eye contact depending on the target. But the endings were all similar. She left them with just enough confusion and guilt to paralyze them. And then she moved on, perfectly intact. Untouched. And now it was my turn. Except I was reading it all in real time. At some point, I realized I was pacing the living room. Heart hammering. Hands cold. I was trying to make sense of something that didn't want to be understood. This wasn't just betrayal. This wasn't about love lost. This was about identity. Control. Whatever Mary Bell was, she wasn't who she told me she was. Not to me. Not to anyone. It hit me like a wave. She had never actually been with any of us. We were stages. Seasons. Material. I sat down again, this time opening a file labeled Observer Mode Notes. It was a running log. Her reflections, it seemed, written as if she were narrating a study. And my name was all over it. Lowell is more vulnerable than the others. Easier to direct emotionally. Less reactive. May require a more abrupt ending or external catalyst to finalize separation. There was one line that stopped me cold. Monitor how long he takes to notice. If longer than Q3 projection, test deeper shame response, possibly via public embarrassment. And that's when it finally connected. That comment she made at the bar, the one about doing it again if she hadn't felt guilty, it wasn't a slip. It was the catalyst. I wasn't supposed to overhear it by accident. I was supposed to overhear it on schedule. The worst part was realizing how precisely she'd measured me. How right she was. I hadn't confronted her. I hadn't even raised my voice. I'd done exactly what she expected, collapsed inward. Quietly. Alone. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke up on the floor. The laptop battery had died. It was dark again. She still hadn't come back. And in that darkness, For the first time in my life, I felt truly disposable. But I also felt something else. Awake. The next morning, I didn't open the laptop. I couldn't. I knew what I'd find in there. More files, more names, more versions of the same sickness dressed up as strategy. I wasn't scared of the information anymore. I was scared of how normalized it was starting to feel. Like the shock had worn off and my brain was trying to categorize it, put it in a drawer somewhere, and close it forever. But I couldn't pretend anymore. Not after seeing how precise it all was. Not after realizing I hadn't even been the first or the worst. The most disturbing part of all of this. The elegance. There was no rage, no chaos, no sloppy cheating or messy confessions. What she was doing had form. Discipline. I kept coming back to that idea. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a method. She didn't come home that day. No text. No call. No apologies. No gaslighting, even. Just silence. And in that silence, a question started creeping in. Something that had been scratching at the back of my head since I first opened that Phase 2 folder. Why document any of this at all? If she was just cheating, or manipulating, or emotionally drifting from one man to the next, why write it down so meticulously? Why keep a log? Why timestamps, psychological notes, labeled outcomes? Who were the files for? I told myself it was habit. Maybe just her sick way of processing control. But then I remembered something buried from a year ago. We were in bed. She had just gotten back from a work trip, and she was half asleep, scrolling something on her iPad. I asked what she was reading. She said, without even looking up, just case notes. I didn't ask from where. I didn't think to. She didn't work in therapy. At least, not officially. But the way she said it, now it made sense. Not case studies. Case notes. Her own. The more I thought about it, the more things started clicking into place. Little conversations I'd forgotten. Slips. Weird deflections. Once, she told me that most people never realize who's watching them until it's over. I thought she was being poetic. Another time, when we saw a couple arguing at a restaurant, she said, "He's reacting on schedule. You can tell." And I laughed, like an idiot, because I thought she was just being clever. I didn't realize she meant it literally. By that afternoon, I had made up my mind. I was going to stop reacting. I wasn't going to fall into whatever psychological narrative arc she'd written for me. I wasn't going to crumble. I was going to watch her. I wasn't trained in anything, but I was done being a variable in someone else's experiment. It was time to take notes of my own. I didn't tell her I'd found anything. When she finally texted that night, it was dry and vague. "Hope you're okay. Taking time to process too." I replied with a short, "Same here. Let me know if you want to talk." I needed her to believe I was still in her script, still following the emotional choreography she'd mapped out for me in bullet points and observation logs. I played it cool, calm, withdrawn, like a man who didn't suspect a thing. Meanwhile, I was building a backup of every folder on her laptop and quietly checking her browser history for any clue about where she was spending her nights. That's when I found it. A site I didn't recognize. Password protected. Generic-looking interface. But the tab title wasn't generic at all. It read, Client Interface, Cycle 12. My heart skipped. She had logged in 6 times in the past 3 weeks. Same IP every time. Our home network. There was no password saved, but the URL path ended in /users/lcroll. That's not her name. Not even close. And it definitely wasn't mine. I copied the link and ran it through an archived web cache. I didn't get much, but I got enough to see the homepage header before the site redirected to a login screen. The tagline underneath the logo read, "Behavioral patterning for emotional discontinuity." What the hell does that even mean? Unless it means what I think it does. And suddenly, I wasn't sure this was about infidelity at all. This wasn't about Tanner. It wasn't about love, or marriage, or failure. This was about something else entirely. Something structured, institutional, maybe even commercial. And if that's true, if this is bigger than her, if there are others, then I'm not just a broken husband. I'm a test subject. I didn't sleep again, but this time it wasn't from heartbreak. It was something colder, cleaner, the kind of alertness that only shows up when fear and logic shake hands. I couldn't stop thinking about that login screen, client interface, cycle 12. The phrasing was too intentional, too sterile. This wasn't a personal journal or a shared cloud folder. This was a system, a platform, a framework she had access to, and apparently used regularly. I kept running scenarios in my head. Best case, it's some weird roleplay thing. Some fringe psychology enthusiast group she got tangled up in. Worst case, she's part of something larger. A program. An experiment. Something that doesn't end just because I found out. And that thought sat heavy in my chest. The idea that my life wasn't just damaged, it was observed. I started small. I checked our Wi-Fi router logs. Technical, boring stuff, but there it was again, same domain, different user handles. There were at least 4 in total, all accessed from our network over the past year. One of them ended in /J Weiss, a name I didn't recognize, but something about it felt off. Not random. And then it hit me. I'd seen that name once. It was listed in the subject line of an email she accidentally forwarded to me months ago. At the time, I assumed it was some client or coworker. I didn't think twice. But now I wondered, was he another subject? Another Lowell? I couldn't get the idea out of my head. What if Tanner wasn't the affair? What if he was the next project? What if I was the bridge between them? What if this whole thing had been staged to observe how I responded to being discarded compared against someone else's reaction to being chosen? It wasn't about who she loved. It was about what I'd do. That's when I realized something else. She didn't just need me to hear that comment at the bar. She needed to watch what happened afterward. The silence. The walking away. The texts. The login patterns. I was reacting in exactly the kind of quiet collapse she'd predicted. But now I was watching her back. I waited 3 days before doing anything. 3 days of pretending to live normally. I went to work. I cooked. I responded to Mary Bell's dry, soulless texts like everything was paused, like I was processing. But in the background, every spare second was spent looking for the name I'd found in her browser history. J. Weiss. I combed old emails, scanned her folders again, even checked her phone bill for any unfamiliar numbers. Nothing. No address. No photo. Just that strange, sterile handle. A ghost attached to something mechanical. But then, late at night, I remembered the forwarded email. The one she'd accidentally sent me months ago. I deleted it at the time, didn't even read it. But I had a habit of never emptying my trash folder, and for once, that flaw worked in my favor. It was still there. The original message was brief, almost boring. Cycle complete. Observation matched. No interruption detected. Ready for integration pending client review. Integration? What did that even mean? There was a phone number in the footer, no company logo, no email signature, just a line of digits with a +1 country code and nothing else. I stared at it for almost an hour before calling. I don't even know what I thought I'd say. Maybe I hoped it would be disconnected, or someone would answer and laugh it off as spam. But someone did answer. And they didn't laugh. They said, "You're not supposed to have this number." No hello. No name. Just that flat sentence, like I'd dialed a locked room. I stayed silent for too long. Then I asked, "Who was Mary Bell?" There was a pause. Then, with the same disturbing calmness, the man replied, "She's not yours anymore." I felt something tighten in my chest. I asked, "Is this cycle 12? Another pause, longer this time. Then, very quietly, he said, "How long have you known?" "I've seen the files," I told him. "I know what she's doing." He exhaled, not a sigh, more like relief. Like I'd just confirmed something he suspected. And then, finally, he said the one thing I didn't expect. "You're not the only one." That was it. He hung up. I tried calling back, but the number was already disconnected. I stood there in the kitchen with the phone still to my ear, listening to that empty tone, trying to convince myself I hadn't imagined the whole thing. But I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. His voice was real. That sentence was real. And most importantly, that feeling I got while talking to him, like we'd both walked the same path, was unmistakable. And that's when I realized I'd been thinking about this all wrong. I kept assuming I was in the middle of something. But what if I was already at the end? What if Mary Bell was never here to be with me? What if she was here to leave me, strategically, with purpose, and everything before that was just set dressing? And now that her exit had been processed, reviewed, approved, she didn't need me anymore. For the first time in weeks, I left the apartment without checking who had texted or whether Mary Bell had posted something or if that encrypted site had gone dark. I didn't care anymore. Not because I had answers, but because I finally understood something more important than the truth. I didn't need it. What mattered was this. She was gone, and I was still here. In a strange way, that man on the phone had done me a favor. His words haunted me for days. "You're not the only one." But the more I thought about them, the more peace I felt. Because it meant it wasn't me. It was never about my flaws, my quiet nature, my inability to fight back fast enough. It was a pattern I was dropped into. A script I was never meant to write, only play a part in. And now that part was over. She didn't reach out again. No final monologue. No staged apology. Just a silence that no longer felt threatening. It felt earned. I think, on some level, she knew I'd seen through it all. And she didn't want to risk breaking the illusion she'd built for herself, that she was in control and I was disposable. But I wasn't disposable. I was resilient. I deleted the files. Every single one. Not out of fear, but out of defiance. I wasn't going to carry her documentation into the next phase of my life like some cursed archive. I didn't need to become the historian of my own pain. She wanted me cataloged, categorized, archived, quietly shelved. I refused. I started walking every morning. Nothing dramatic. Just a thermos, a hoodie, and silence. No headphones. Just real air, real ground, real breath. The first week felt fake, like I was performing healing for myself. But by the second week, I noticed I wasn't thinking about her anymore. I was thinking about me. About what I used to enjoy before I bent every part of myself to be easier to live with. About how I used to write music. About the cabin trip I kept putting off. About how, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel watched. I met someone too. Not in a storybook way. Nothing poetic. Just a conversation with a woman at the park about how awful the coffee was from the cart vendor. Her name's Elise. She's blunt, direct, doesn't make you guess what she's thinking. And when I told her I'd been through a mess, she didn't look uncomfortable. She just nodded and said, "Everyone has. The good ones crawl out anyway." I smiled so hard I almost forgot how to respond. I don't know where it's going, and for once, I don't need to. Because I'm no longer waiting for someone else to define the chapter I'm in. I'm writing it myself now. Unobserved, unmeasured, unreplicated. I wasn't broken by her. I was rebuilt after her. So if you're reading this, and you've ever felt discarded, studied, unchosen, let me tell you something no one told me when I needed it most. Sometimes, not being picked is the luckiest thing that can happen to you. Because now, I finally understand. I wasn't chosen. I was freed.